Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when God whispers in symbols rather than sentences, when He hides His guidance in the smallest, simplest things we often overlook. Salt, ordinary, humble, taken for granted, has carried spiritual meaning across generations, across cultures, across the quiet rooms of our homes and the quiet corners of our hearts. Today, I want to remind you that when you place salt with intention, with prayer, and with faith, you are not performing a ritual. You are opening a door for clarity, a door for protection, a door for God to step in and move on your behalf. In a world heavy with noise, doubt, and unseen battles, sometimes the divine asks us to do something small so He can do something great. Salt symbolizes purification, clarity, and divine protection, and throughout history it has carried a weight far greater than its physical form. When we speak of salt in a spiritual sense, we are speaking of something that cleanses not only the space around us, but the emotions, intentions, and energies that surround our daily lives. Salt has been used as a reminder that what God touches cannot be contaminated, what He blesses cannot be stolen, and what He guards cannot be shaken. When we place salt with intention, we are honoring the idea that clarity begins with removing what is clouded, protection begins with recognizing what is harmful, and purification begins with choosing to lift away everything that has settled on our spirit like dust. Salt teaches us that even the smallest grain can hold the most powerful meaning because God Himself has always used simple things to carry divine truths. Salt has always been more than an ingredient. It has been a symbol of covenant, of commitment, of the promise that what is preserved will not decay. Ancient cultures believed salt sealed agreements because it represented something that could never rot or disappear. In the same way, when you bring salt into your home with awareness, you are symbolically saying to God, let what is pure stay pure. Let what is protected remain protected. Let what you have promised over my life stand firm like the earth itself. Our homes are meant to be places of peace, restoration, and spiritual grounding, but the world outside often brings burdens through our doors. Burdens of worry, fear, anger, confusion, or exhaustion. Salt acts as a silent guard, a quiet watcher in the corners of the home, reminding us that not everything that tries to enter should be allowed to stay. There is something sacred about the way salt absorbs, the way it gathers heaviness without speaking, the way it holds what does not belong and keeps it from touching the heart of a home. It teaches us that spiritual protection is not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it is gentle, subtle, and steady. Just as salt draws out impurities from food, it draws out emotional and spiritual impurities that cling to us without permission. When you intentionally place salt in a space, you are placing a boundary between yourself and what seeks to drain your peace. You are creating a line that says, this home will not be a resting place for negativity, nor a shelter for spiritual disturbances, nor a container for worries that do not belong to you. Salt also stands for clarity, and clarity is one of the most precious gifts God gives. Confusion is one of the heaviest spiritual weights a person can carry, and often it slips into the mind gradually, quietly, like a fog rolling over a calm sea. Salt has long been a symbol of sharpening the mind, clearing the senses, and grounding the decisions we make. When you place salt in a room, it becomes a reminder that God does not dwell in confusion. He dwells in light, in truth, in order, and in the unshakable clarity that comes when you step into alignment with His guidance. It is a way of saying, God, illuminate my thoughts. Remove the haze. Show me what is real and what is distraction. Many times, confusion is not a lack of information, but an overflow of noise. Salt invites the spirit to filter out that noise, leaving only what is essential, purposeful, and aligned with divine direction. Divine protection is not always about shielding us from visible harm. Often it is about guarding us from unseen forces, energies that drain us, words spoken in anger, intentions sent toward us that do not match the love of God. Salt has historically been placed near doorways, corners, windows, and thresholds because these are the points where energy enters and exits. A home is not only built from bricks and walls, it is built from the echoes of conversations, the emotions of the people who live there, the silent thoughts held in the air. Salt serves as a spiritual filter, catching what should not enter, softening what feels harsh, and pushing away what has no place in the atmosphere of peace. It is a symbol of the divine shield God places around those who call on Him with sincerity. When you look at salt closely, you see something extraordinary. Each grain is small, yet countless grains together create something powerful enough to cleanse, preserve, and protect. It becomes a reminder that spiritual strength is not found in one grand act, but in consistent, intentional, small choices. Each grain resembles a prayer, a step of faith, a moment of surrender, a whisper of trust. When salt is placed with belief, it becomes a physical representation of spiritual action. It becomes a way to tell God that you are ready for purification, ready for clarity, ready for protection, ready for something sacred to move through your home and your life. Salt teaches humility too. It does not boast, it does not demand attention, it does not seek praise. It simply does its work. In the same way, spiritual purification is not always dramatic or visible. Sometimes the greatest shifts happen quietly, without applause, without recognition. Sometimes what God is healing in your home is happening behind the scenes in ways you may not even notice at first. Salt reminds us that divine work is often subtle but always effective. It reminds us to trust the process even when we cannot yet see the progress. In many traditions, salt is seen as a bridge between the physical and spiritual world. It is something you can hold in your hand, yet its meaning reaches into the unseen. That is why placing salt in the home is not about superstition, it is about symbolism. It is an act of faith, a gesture that acknowledges that you believe in God's power to cleanse, restore, and protect. When you place salt, you are participating in a deeper spiritual language, a way of communicating to God without words, showing Him that your heart is open and your spirit is willing. Salt also teaches us about value. There was a time when salt was so precious it was used as currency. It reminds us that the things which appear ordinary often carry extraordinary worth. Just as salt elevates flavor in food, spiritual salt elevates the energy of a home. It brings attention to what truly matters. It highlights the blessings that have already been given and the ones that are on their way. It reminds you that your spirit, your peace, your home, your relationships, your purpose, they all hold value that must be protected. When people of old placed salt in their homes, they were claiming authority over their space. They were declaring that their home was not just a shelter, but a sanctuary. They were aligning themselves with divine order. You are doing the same when you place salt with intention. You are saying that your home will be a place where love lives, where faith grows, where God's presence is welcome. You are saying that heaviness must dissolve, that negativity must not take root, that confusion must lose its grip. Salt becomes a silent prayer resting in the corners, whispering protection over the walls, keeping peace steady like an anchor. Salt embodies the idea that purification is not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice. Just as we must cleanse our minds and hearts repeatedly, we must cleanse our environments. The world brings dust, life brings clutter, emotions bring residue. Salt becomes a companion in the journey of continuously clearing what does not serve your spirit. It encourages you to be intentional about what you allow into your life, what you keep, what you release, and what you invite in. Salt also speaks to resilience. It survives storms, dissolves in water, yet reappears when the water evaporates. It adapts, transforms, and endures. It becomes a reminder that your spirit can endure too. That though life may dissolve you at times, you can reform, reshape, and rise again. Salt represents the strength God places within you, the strength to withstand, to heal, to recover, and to continue moving forward even when the path feels uncertain. It is a reminder that the divine does not abandon those who seek purification, clarity, and protection. It surrounds them, strengthens them, and guides them. Salt, in all its simplicity, becomes a tool for spiritual alignment. It encourages you to take responsibility for your space, your emotions, your direction. It invites God into the silent corners of your life, the places no one sees, the places you may have ignored or forgotten. It honors the truth that spiritual cleansing begins within before it reflects outward. It teaches you to release what weighs you down and embrace what uplifts your spirit. It becomes a symbol of surrender, of openness, of willingness to let God move in the areas where you need Him. Placing salt with intention invites spiritual alignment in your home, because intention is the bridge between the physical act and the spiritual result. When you place salt without thought, it is just a mineral resting on a surface. But when you place it with awareness, with purpose, with prayer in your heart and clarity in your mind, it becomes a vessel, a symbol, a quiet messenger that carries your desire for peace, protection, and purification into the unseen realm. Intention is what awakens the spiritual dimension of an action. And salt becomes powerful, not merely because of what it is, but because of what you mean when you place it. Every corner of a home carries energy. Every room holds memories, conversations, emotions, footstep echoes, and silent imprints of the people who enter. A home breathes, receives, and absorbs, and when you place salt intentionally, you are choosing what you want your home to absorb and what you want it to release. You are telling your home, your environment, and your spirit that you are ready for alignment with something higher, something sacred, something that reflects the presence of God. Intention transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. When you place salt with focused thought, you are not relying on superstition, you are partnering with divine order. You are saying, I choose peace over chaos. I choose clarity over confusion. I choose alignment over drifting. Many people move through their homes without realizing how deeply their environment affects their mind, their emotions, and their spiritual health. A home that is heavy with old energy can dim motivation, weaken faith, and drown out inner guidance. But a home aligned with spiritual clarity becomes a nurturing ground where vision grows, where strength returns, where God's whispers become easier to hear. Salt becomes a tool that helps restore this alignment, not because it holds magic on its own, but because it carries the intention of the person who places it. Humans carry energy with them. Every visitor brings a vibration, some uplifting, some neutral, some heavy, some draining, some silently troubled. When salt is placed intentionally, it absorbs what does not belong and protects what should remain. It becomes like a silent guardian that watches over the emotional fabric of your household. It sits in the corners, doing its quiet work, holding the intention you planted within it. When you place salt intentionally, you are acknowledging that you are spiritually responsible for your home. You are deciding that you no longer want to live by default, absorbing whatever the world sends your way. You want to shape your environment deliberately so that it supports your peace, honors your faith, and nurtures the strength God is building within you. Intention also brings awareness. It makes you more conscious of your thoughts, your emotions, and your spiritual condition. When you take even a few moments to place salt with prayer, with clarity, with focus, you shift the energy within yourself first. That shift radiates outward into the physical space. You begin to notice what needs to be released, what needs to be forgiven, what needs to be healed, what needs to be welcomed. Alignment is not something that simply happens to you. It is something you participate in. And placing salt intentionally becomes an act of participation, a ritual of awareness, a moment of choosing spiritual alignment over spiritual drift. Salt placed with intention acts like a reset button for the home. It clears emotional residue, dissolves spiritual clutter, and makes room for God's presence to settle more freely. When you walk into a room where intentional salt has been placed, you might feel a difference even if you cannot explain it. The air feels lighter, the atmosphere feels calmer, your thoughts move more smoothly, your spirit feels less burdened. This is because intention carries vibration, and vibration influences everything around it. You are aligning the atmosphere with peace, with purity, with direction, with the awareness that God is moving. Intention also honors God. It shows that you are not moving through your spiritual life carelessly or casually. You are making conscious room for Him, acknowledging His role not just in your prayers, but in your physical environment. A home without spiritual intention becomes vulnerable to emotional storms, unresolved stress, and negative cycles. But a home infused with intention becomes a sanctuary. When you place salt with prayerful focus, you are preparing the space for God to move without obstruction. You are saying, God, this home belongs to you. Every corner, every doorway, every window, every breath inside these walls, I offer it all back to your guidance. When salt is placed with intention, it becomes part of a conversation between you and the divine. It is a gesture that says you are willing to align your physical world with your spiritual truth. It becomes a way of grounding your faith in action. Many people pray for peace, but live in homes filled with emotional clutter. Many pray for clarity while allowing confusion to linger in their environment. Many pray for protection while their spirit remains exposed to unnecessary influences. Intention connects prayer to action. When you place salt, you are no longer waiting passively for something to change. You are participating in the shift, setting the stage for God to bring the transformation you need. Intentional placement also affects your mind. It makes you more disciplined, more aware, more spiritually alert. When you place salt and mentally declare peace, Your mind begins to adopt that peace. When you declare clarity, your thoughts begin to loosen and open. When you declare protection, your spirit stands taller. The salt may sit in the corner, but the intention lives within you. It transforms how you walk through your home, how you handle your day, how you respond to challenges, how you listen for God's voice. Because alignment begins with awareness, and awareness begins with intention. Salt placed with intention has a way of revealing what needs to be addressed. You may begin to notice areas of your life that feel heavy or unresolved. You may feel inspired to declutter, to forgive, to release, to clean, to organize, to pray more deeply. Spiritual alignment often manifests in physical choices, and salt becomes a subtle catalyst for these changes. It opens the space for clarity to flow, for intuition to rise, for divine guidance to reach you without obstruction. You may find yourself shedding old habits or embracing new ones simply because the energy of your home begins to support your growth rather than hinder it. Salt with intention reminds you that God moves where there is readiness. He fills the spaces you prepare. He heals the areas you uncover. He strengthens the parts of you that you surrender. Placing salt becomes a reminder to stay open, to stay grounded, to stay aligned, to stay attentive to His whispers. It becomes a symbol of your willingness to partner with Him in shaping your home, your inner world, and your spiritual journey. When your home is aligned, your spirit begins to align. When your spirit aligns, your path becomes clearer. When your path clears, God's instruction becomes easier to follow. Salt placed with intention becomes a spiritual anchor. It steadies you during emotional turbulence. It reminds you that clarity is possible. It reinforces that protection is available. It helps you reconnect to your center, your purpose, your faith. It becomes a quiet but steady affirmation that you are safe, supported, and guided. Alignment is not a destination, but a continuous practice, and salt placed with intention becomes part of that practice. It reminds you that you have the authority to shape the energy of your home, the direction of your thoughts, and the condition of your spirit. It reminds you that God honors those who seek alignment with sincerity. It reminds you that the smallest acts, when done with purpose, can invite the greatest spiritual shifts. And when salt is placed with intention, your home becomes more than a building. It becomes a living, breathing sanctuary where God can move freely, where peace can settle deeply, and where clarity can rise gently without being drowned by the noise of the world. Small actions of faith create space for God's movement, because faith is not always expressed through grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Often it is woven into the simplest choices, the quietest moments, the unnoticed steps taken when no one is watching. Small actions carry a purity that large actions sometimes lose, because they rise from a heart that is sincere, humble, and attentive. When you take a small step in faith, placing salt in a corner, whispering a prayer when you wake, opening your windows to let in new air, lighting a candle with intention, resetting your thoughts before speaking, you are signaling to God that you are willing to participate in the transformation He wants to bring into your life. These actions may seem minor in the moment, but they create openings in the spiritual realm where divine presence can settle, move, and guide. Faith is not measured in volume or size, it is measured in sincerity. A small action done with true belief carries more spiritual weight than a grand action done with doubt or pressure. When you place salt with awareness or perform any humble spiritual practice, You are telling God that you trust Him enough to act before you see results. You are saying, I may not understand everything, but I am willing to move. And this willingness becomes an invitation. God moves where people make space. He speaks where people listen. He acts where people show readiness. These small expressions of faith open your heart, your mind, and your environment to the divine, clearing the pathways that become blocked by fear, confusion, or hesitation. Many people expect God to change their circumstances without making any adjustments in themselves. They pray for blessings but hold on to behaviors that contradict those blessings. They ask for clarity, but cling to habits that cloud the mind. They want peace, but allow chaos to linger in their homes and hearts. Small acts of faith break this cycle. They become the bridge between desire and transformation. When you take even a single step toward alignment, God meets you there. Not because He needs your action to move, but because your action prepares you to receive. Faith is not only about trusting God to act, it is about showing Him that you are ready to receive what He brings. Small actions are powerful because they are consistent. You may place salt once and forget about it, but something in your awareness has already shifted. You have marked that space as intentional. You have planted a seed of belief. You have demonstrated that you are willing to participate in your own healing, your own protection, your own spiritual clarity. And God honors participation. He honors movement. He honors willingness. Even if the action itself seems ordinary, the intention behind it releases spiritual energy that invites divine alignment. When the heart is aligned with God through small actions, the door to bigger blessings opens naturally. There is a beauty in the humility of small faith steps. They teach you that transformation is not a sudden explosion, but a gentle unfolding. A seed does not burst into a tree in a single moment. It grows slowly, silently, consistently. In the same way, your spirit grows through the accumulation of small, intentional actions. Placing salt with purpose may not feel like a mighty act of faith, but it represents something deeper, an inward shift, a rising awareness, a strengthening of spiritual sensitivity. These subtle shifts prepare you to recognize God's movements more clearly when they arrive. Small actions of faith also cultivate discipline. Discipline is not built through occasional grand moments. It is built through daily mindful choices. When you intentionally place salt, say a quick prayer, breathe deeply before reacting, clean a space to release old energy, or reflect for even a minute before sleep, you are strengthening your spiritual muscles. These muscles are what help you hold on to faith during difficult times. They are what help you stay grounded when life becomes overwhelming. They are what help you remain connected to God even when answers seem delayed. Discipline does not flourish in chaos. It grows through repeated small acts that anchor your spirit and sharpen your awareness. There is also a quiet strength in small actions because they bypass ego. Grand gestures often attract attention, praise, or recognition. But small actions live in the silence. They are performed not to impress others, but to nourish the soul. God sees these actions and responds, not to reward your effort, but because humility creates a clear space for divine movement. Ego blocks the flow of guidance, while humility opens it. Small faith steps are humble by nature, and humility invites grace. Grace flows where humility lives, And grace is what transforms the atmosphere of your home and the condition of your heart. When you place salt or take any small spiritual step, you are doing something similar to cleaning a window. At first, the difference may be subtle, barely noticeable, but over time, as you continue gently wiping away dust, the window becomes clearer. Light enters more easily. The view sharpens. The atmosphere changes. Spiritual clarity works the same way. Each small act wipes away a bit of emotional residue, a bit of mental clutter, a bit of spiritual heaviness. Eventually, you begin to see yourself, your purpose, and God's direction more clearly. The change does not happen all at once, but the small steps create the conditions where change can take root and flourish. Small actions create spiritual rhythm. Every home has a rhythm, even if people do not realize it. It is the rhythm of conversations, emotions, habits, and thoughts echoing through the environment. When you place salt intentionally or perform any faith-based ritual, you shift that rhythm. You create a spiritual beat that aligns with peace, protection, and clarity. That rhythm influences your behavior, your reactions, and your decisions. It influences the energy of anyone who enters. It influences the sense of stability you feel even in difficult times. A peaceful rhythm does not happen by accident. It is crafted through repeated small actions that reinforce the atmosphere you desire. Faith has always been more about trust than understanding. And small actions help build trust because they require you to move even when the outcome is unclear. They require patience, which deepens resilience. They require consistency, which deepens maturity. They require awareness, which deepens sensitivity to God's voice. Many of the greatest spiritual breakthroughs begin with small acts that seem insignificant at first. A small prayer whispered through tears, a small decision to forgive, a small moment of silence before reacting, a small choice to let go of something heavy, a small declaration of gratitude. These actions create spiritual openings that allow God to move freely. Small actions of faith also teach you to value the present moment. They remind you that spirituality is not something that happens only in churches, temples, or grand ceremonies. It happens in your kitchen, your bedroom, your hallway, the corner of your living room. It happens in your breath, your thoughts, your habits, your decisions. When you place salt intentionally, you are acknowledging that every area of your home and every moment of your life can be infused with spiritual meaning. You are recognizing that God is not distant but present, not waiting for you to be perfect but responding to the simple steps you take with sincerity. Even the smallest action can break a cycle of worry, a cycle of negativity, a cycle of emotional stagnation, a cycle of spiritual numbness. When you do something symbolic and intentional, you interrupt patterns that have become automatic. You create a spiritual pause where new possibilities can emerge. Even if the action is small, its effect can be wide. One moment of intention can shift your emotional state. One symbolic gesture can reset your perspective. One act of faith can dissolve a week of tension. One small step can lead to a new path. Small actions also remind you that you are not powerless. Life often overwhelms the spirit by making people believe that only big decisions or major events can create change. But change begins in small moments. A single seed grows into a tree. A single spark lights a fire. A single drop begins a river. A single moment of faith opens the door for God to move in ways you could not predict. Your small actions are not insignificant. They are catalysts. They are invitations. They are signals to the divine that you are ready, willing, and open. When you place salt with intention, you are planting a seed of faith in your home. That seed may not bloom immediately, but it begins a process. It begins aligning your environment with your desires. It begins purifying the atmosphere. It begins shifting your internal energies. It begins strengthening your spiritual sensitivity. It begins inviting divine presence into the quiet corners where you need healing, guidance, and renewal. God can move anywhere, but He moves most freely where faith has made room. Small actions of faith are sacred whispers. They say, God, I trust you. They say, I am ready for clarity. They say, I choose peace. They say, I make room for your presence. And God hears every whisper, sees every gesture, honors every step. Even when the action seems small, the faith behind it opens the way for transformation to enter quietly, deeply, and powerfully, without needing noise or spectacle, without needing recognition, without needing perfect understanding. Salt becomes a reminder that God works through the simple things when your heart is open, because simplicity has always been one of the most powerful languages of the divine. God does not need extravagance to move. He does not require grandness to speak. He has always chosen the ordinary to unlock the extraordinary. A shepherd's staff, a small stone, a mustard seed, a whisper of wind, a single moment of surrender. These are the vessels through which His power has flowed for generations. Salt is another one of those simple vessels, humble in appearance yet profound in symbolism. When you place salt with sincerity, it becomes a spiritual anchor, reminding you that God's presence does not depend on the size of your offering, but on the openness of your spirit. Salt teaches you that spiritual depth is not measured by complexity. It is measured by sincerity, intention, and willingness. Many people search for complicated rituals, powerful phrases, or dramatic signs, believing that God's presence must be accompanied by intensity. But the truth is that God often moves most profoundly in quiet, simple, ordinary moments. He moves in the breath you take after crying. He moves in the stillness that follows chaos. He moves in the gentle shift of your thoughts when you choose hope over fear. Salt becomes a symbol of that truth, small, quiet, uncomplicated, yet capable of carrying deep spiritual meaning when your heart is open to it. Simplicity is powerful because it cuts through the noise. The world is full of distractions, complications, and emotional clutter. People get lost in overthinking, analyzing, comparing themselves, and trying to interpret spiritual signs with unnecessary heaviness. But salt teaches you that understanding God does not require a maze, it requires openness. When you place salt in your home, you are performing an act that is simple enough for anyone to do, yet meaningful enough to shift the spiritual atmosphere. It is a reminder that God does not hide behind complexity. He reveals Himself through clarity, purity, and sincerity. He reveals Himself when you quiet your mind, soften your heart, and open the door to His presence. Salt becomes a symbol of God's gentle guidance. It sits silently without drawing attention, without demanding effort, but it works constantly, absorbing what does not belong and releasing the energy necessary for peace to settle. In the same way, God often works behind the scenes, subtly aligning things, quietly removing what would harm you, gently guiding your steps long before you notice the shift. When your heart is open, you begin to recognize these quiet movements. You begin to see God not only in miracles, but also in the small moments that soften your life. Salt reminds you that the divine does not always arrive in thunder and light. Sometimes he arrives like a whisper resting in a corner of the room. Openness of the heart is what awakens the spiritual significance of simple things. If you place salt while your heart is closed, it becomes just a ritual. But if you place it with openness, it becomes a moment of alignment, a moment of spiritual connection, a moment where your inner world and your physical environment come together under divine guidance. When your heart is open, every small action becomes a prayer. Every intentional gesture becomes a bridge connecting you to God's presence. Salt is a physical reminder of a deeper truth. God meets you where your heart is ready, not where your actions are elaborate. Salt also teaches acceptance. It dissolves easily, flows freely, adapts to its environment without resistance, and still maintains its essence. It reminds you that spiritual growth requires openness to change, willingness to release, and courage to surrender. Many people close their hearts because they fear disappointment, heartbreak, loss, or uncertainty. But a closed heart cannot receive, cannot grow, cannot align. Salt encourages you to soften, to loosen your grip on fear, to let yourself be guided, to trust that God's hand is steady even when life feels unstable. Simplicity becomes a pathway to acceptance, and acceptance becomes a pathway to spiritual transformation. God often uses simple things to bring clarity because simplicity is easier for the spirit to understand. The complicated aspects of life often confuse the heart, but simple moments realign it. Placing salt becomes a grounding practice that reconnects you to what matters: purity, peace, protection, and awareness of God's presence. It reminds you that you do not need to perform in order to be spiritually connected. You simply need to be receptive. You need to bring your heart into a posture of openness, humility, and willingness. You need to show God that you are ready to listen, even if the message is subtle. Openness creates space for understanding, and understanding creates the pathway for divine wisdom to enter. Salt also highlights the power of presence. When you intentionally place it, you are practicing being present, conscious of your home, aware of your spirit, attentive to your emotional state, mindful of the energy around you. This presence sharpens your spiritual sensitivity, making you more aware of when God is speaking, nudging, guiding, or comforting. Presence is a spiritual discipline, and salt becomes a reminder of that discipline. It sits quietly, encouraging you to slow down, breathe, and reconnect with the divine in the simplest ways. When your heart is open, even a grain of salt can speak to your spirit. God works through simple things because simple things require trust. When something is simple, your mind does not get in the way. Your ego does not take over. You are forced to rely on sincerity rather than logic. The act may not make perfect sense to the mind, but the heart understands it. That openness of heart is what creates a spiritual doorway, a space through which God can move without resistance. Salt invites you to surrender your overthinking, to embrace the beauty of uncomplicated faith, to remember that spiritual truth is not found in complexity, but in connection. Salt becomes a reflection of the spiritual truth that you do not need to be perfect to be aligned. You do not need to have everything figured out. You do not need to understand every mystery. You simply need to be willing to let God move, willing to allow Him to guide you, willing to accept that he often works in ways that are gentle rather than dramatic, in ways that are quiet rather than explosive. Salt reminds you that small things can carry big meaning when the heart is open to receive them. Openness is an invitation. When your heart opens, God flows through every crevice of your life, filling the hollow spaces, healing the wounded parts, cleansing the heavy energies, illuminating the dark corners. Salt symbolizes this cleansing, this purifying, this gentle clearing away. God does not need thunder to transform you. He needs openness. And when you approach the divine with a willing heart, he can use even the simplest objects to bring profound spiritual shifts. Salt also reminds you that God values honesty over performance. Simplicity strips away pretense. It removes the layers of complication that people often hide behind. When you perform a small spiritual act like placing salt, it is not to show others who you are. It is to show God what lives in your heart. When you do something simple, you cannot impress anyone. You can only be sincere, and sincerity is one of the most powerful spiritual offerings you can give, because God listens most clearly when the heart speaks without embellishment. A simple act becomes sacred when the heart behind it is open. Salt is a symbol that holds this truth. When you place it with a closed heart, it is ordinary. But when you place it with an open heart, it becomes spiritual. It becomes meaningful. It becomes transformative. God uses it to remind you that his presence does not require complexity, it requires receptivity. He uses it to show you that spiritual depth lies not in elaborate rituals, but in honest alignment. Simplicity invites clarity. When you remove the noise, the clutter, the unnecessary complications, God's guidance becomes easier to recognize. Salt teaches you to return to the basics of your spiritual life: faith, awareness, intention, humility, openness. These fundamentals are the foundation upon which a deeper connection with the divine is built. When your heart is open, the simplest things become teachers, symbols, reminders of God's constant presence. Salt is a physical symbol of a spiritual posture. Its presence in your home represents your willingness to clear, to protect, to purify, to surrender. It symbolizes your readiness to let God move without forcing outcomes, without demanding signs, without losing yourself in overthinking. It is a reminder that God works quietly, gently, steadily, through objects, through moments, through whispers, through the simple act of an open heart, meeting a divine presence that has been waiting to enter the spaces you finally allowed to open.